Okay, I just want a verbal confirmation at this point. Kevin, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, just wanted to make sure. All right, let me go ahead and send the link in for the Google Slides and we'll get started with the vocab. Nathan, can you go ahead and read the first word?
Quiver, verb, to shake rapidly with small movements. It was hard to tell whether it was cold or a nerves that was causing Jennifer to quiver.
Okay, and Kevin, can you go ahead and read the second word?
Ravishing, adjective. Extremely beautiful, delightful, and pleasing to the eye. As you would expect, the bride was ravishing as she walked down the chapel aisle.
Okay, and Nathan, can you go ahead and read the third word?
Recapitulate, verb, to summarize in concise form. To retell the essential points of a story. Great public speakers are known for their abilities to recapitulate and gesticulate.
Okay, just wanted to go over the pronunciation of the word. It would be recapitulate. Again, recapitulate. Yeah, it would almost sound like recapitulate, but I guess there's more of a cuss sound, so recapitulate. Again, recapitulate. Okay, and Liam, I noticed that you just joined in. I'm just going to go ahead and send in the link once more. And Liam, can you go ahead and read the last word for the vocab?
Reciprocate, to give or act in turn following the lead of another, to give or do in return for something else. It was difficult to determine how best to reciprocate for all of the concern, caring, and hope received after the twins were born.
Okay, exactly. And again, just the pronunciation, just to go over it once more. Reciprocate. Again, reciprocate. Okay. And before we do move on to the sentence writing activity, do any of you have any questions about the words we took a look at? Okay, so for the activity, you can either write a paragraph with the minimum of three of these words out. It does say three, but instead I'm going to write a paragraph with the minimum of three sentences. So I'm just going to set a guideline that even if you are choosing to write in a paragraph format, you should write three sentences in total at least. But if you're also write, but you also have the option to write individual sentences for each of the words, equaling out to four different sentences. Right now the time is about 7:05, so we'll work on this until 7:10. And again, before we get started, does anyone have any questions? Okay, if anyone does have any questions at any point, feel free to ask me. Otherwise, again, we'll take this up at 7:10. Just a reminder, there's 2 more minutes until we take up this activity. Okay, the time is 7:10. We're going to proceed with the take up. Kevin, can you go ahead and read your sentences?
Quivered as she got out of the pool. Ravishing. She looked ravishing during the school dance. Recapitulate. In a summary of a story, usually recapitulate what happened. Reciprocate. She gave him expensive watch to reciprocate the help that she had received when she had a concussion.
Okay, just to go over the pronunciation of the third word, I know it's a little bit more difficult. It's recapitulate. Again, recapitulate. It's a little bit more awkward to see. And again, it's recapitulate. And the only correction I would make, everything here is correct, but the sentence does sound a little bit awkward with the, instead it should be in a summary of a story. You usually recapitulate what happened. So that I think was just a mistake, but everything else is correct. All of the words are used correctly. So great job, Kevin. And let me go ahead and paste in your response, Liam. Everyone, please also make sure you are sending in your responses. So Nathan, please make sure you paste it in or send it into the chat. And Liam, can you go ahead and read your sentences?
I quivered as I saw the monster. The art was very ravishing. My teacher recapitulated the story. My friend reciprocated my help by giving me gifts.
Okay, great job. So the only thing I would suggest is going back to the second word, ravishing, extremely beautiful, delightful, and pleasing to the eye. I know it doesn't specifically say it over here, but in general, I do want you to take a note of it. Certain adjectives are best used with certain nouns. And here we're trying to describe a person when we look at the word ravishing. It doesn't fit the best when you use it to describe an object, for example, like you do with art. So that would be the only suggestion I make. Just let me write this over here. Okay, ravishing is usually used for people, not objects like art. And I'm just going to highlight the sentence red as well, so we know it's just this one sentence that should be revised. Okay, and Nathan, can you go ahead and read your response?
John quivered because he saw a snake. It definitely wasn't ravishing in any way. He recapitulated the story to his parents. He decided to reciprocate his steps to run away from danger.
Okay, great job with your responses. Okay, so the only thing I'd want to go over is the last word, reciprocate. It means to give or act in turn following the lead of another. So to give or do in return for something else. The sentence they use here as an example, it was difficult to determine how best to reciprocate for all of the concern caring, and help received after the twins were born. So for the sentence you use it for when you write, they decided to reciprocate its steps to run away from danger, it just wouldn't make sense in that context. It sounds awkward. So I just want to write this comment over here. Give me 1 second. So you can't really reciprocate steps. Steps aren't a favor, gift, or emotion. And again, certain things like this, it just really depends on the context. So if you change around the context, you would be able to use this word. I'm just going to highlight this sentence in red as well, so we know it's the sentence that needs revision. Okay, before we move on to the next activity, does anyone have any questions about this take-up? Okay, we're just going to be reading something really quick on punctuating quotations. I'm just going to have each one of you read through the slides. There's no activity based off this, but of course, as we can imagine, it would come up in the next activities we do. We are going to be writing a short narrative essay, and then we're also going to be writing a short story-based activity as well. So there would definitely be opportunities for us to practice our lesson on punctuating quotations. Let's start off with the first one. Honestly, I'm going to go through maybe 1 to 2 slides, and when I do see opportunities for someone to read, I'll call upon them. When to use quotation marks. Quotation marks are for when you want to use someone else's words in your writing. Let's say you want to write about something you heard your friend say. You could do it like this. John said, followed by a comma. You introduce the first quotation mark, and then you write, I really hate when it's hot outside, with the period enclosed inside the second quotation mark that closes off that quote. You can write about the same thing without using the quotation marks with a couple of changes. John said he hated when it was hot outside. For our narrative essays we do work on, I would prefer direct quotations, and you are required to use actual dialogue. And that is the difference between dialogue and writing a sentence like the second one. The second one really just accounts to be a summary rather than an actual moment in the story. The first sentence contains a direct quote, a quote in which you report the exact words John used. The second sentence contains an indirect quote, which is a paraphrased version of what John said. Quotation marks are only used with direct quotes. The rule isn't just for speech. If you're quoting a written source, you should still put the quote between quotation marks unless you plan to paraphrase it. Okay. Liam, can you go ahead and read this slide?
Run-in and block quotations. Direct quotations come in two different forms, run-in and block. Run-in quotations are shorter and they are formatted the same as the surrounding text. Block quotations are long quotes that are separated from the surrounding text. Usually they appear as a separate paragraph or series of paragraphs with a different font, a change in the line spacing, or a wider margin. In any case, block quotes don't need quotation marks to set them off the remaining text, even though they are direct quotes. And in case you're wondering just how long a quote needs to get for it to be a block quote, it varies from one style guide to another. If you have to follow a style guide, you should check it for best practices. If you don't have to follow a style guide, set your own rule, like 5 lines of text makes a block quotation and stick to it.
Okay. Quotation mark rules. The first rule of using quotations is that once they're open, they have to be closed. The person reading your work needs to know where the quote starts and where it ends. But that's an easy one. What about some trickier quotation mark rules? Quotations and capitalization. Sometimes the text inside the quotation marks is capitalized. Other times it isn't. Capitalization of the quoted material depends on the material itself. If you're quoting a complete sentence, you should start the quote with the capital letter, even if the quote is placed in the middle of a sentence. For example, the exact phrase she used was, and even though this sentence is in the middle of another sentence, it still starts off with a capital T for there, because that is the start of a new sentence in the quote. And it is a full sentence that is being said. It's not just a cut off sentence. If you're quoting a phrase or a part of a sentence, don't start the quote with the capital letter. He called them loud, smelly, and utterly annoying. And he closed the door. Because again, this phrase, loud, smelly, and utterly annoying, as we can imagine, as part to a conversation, would not just be something that was just said. If someone is calling anyone loud, smelly, and utterly annoying, they would address them and they'll be like, these people are loud, smelly, and utterly annoying, and go on to say something else. But since they're just cutting out a phrase from what they're saying, and it's not a full sentence, we would not capitalize the first letter of the sentence. If you're splitting a quote and have to interject a parenthetical, you should capitalize the second part of the quote. The problem with opinions, Paulo explained, is that everyone has one. I'm sorry if I read this incorrectly. You should not capitalize the second part. That's why I was a little bit confused, but you should not. So again, this sentence is being split in because of the interjection of Paula explained. But since that's happening, and since this is still part of the same sentence, you don't suddenly capitalize I in is. It would still be lowercase since it is a part of the same sentence, and the T is already capitalized. Okay, Kevin, can you go ahead and read this slide?
Quotation marks and other punctuation marks. Does punctuation go inside or outside quotation marks? This question mostly refers to the sentence ending punctuation marks that introduce a quote are never placed with quotation marks. Sentence ending punctuation is a whole different story. In the United States, the rule of thumb is that commas and periods always go inside the quotation marks, and colons and semicolons, dashes as well, go inside. There was a storm last night, Paul said. Peter, however, didn't believe him. I'm not sure exactly what happened. Peter's where we called Paul's weakness triangle. He was half deaf, slept like a log, was prone to lying. Paul saw an argument coming, so he moderate only, but I saw. This is going to be a long night. Didn't want to start it with a fight. Question marks and exclamation points have their own rules.
Okay, and these are just some rules that we're gonna just go over. So you would use a comma to introduce a quotation after a standard dialogue tag, a brief introductory phrase, or a dependent clause. Some examples are the detective said, you would put a comma and then write, I am sure, who performed the murder. And that would just be a standard dialogue tag right there. That's an example of a standard dialogue tag. And as DH Natchez explains, comma, the gestures used for greeting others differ greatly from one culture to another. And that would be a brief introductory phrase. So therefore you're putting a comma. Put commas and periods within quotation marks except when a parenthetical reference follows. He said, I may forget your name, but I never forget a face. History is stained with blood spilled in the name of civilization. So again, like this is not a full form sentence, so that's why there is no comma being introduced. Mullen criticizing the apparent inactions writes, Donahue's policy was to do nothing. And again, since there is a parenthetical reference, we do see the period put at the end. So the reference right here in the parenthesis, since we do see that, the period would come at the end. And I'm sure most likely in our rating, we're not going to be doing any of that, so we don't need to really worry about that. But the other examples are pretty easy to remember. And place colons and semicolons outside close quotation marks. So anytime you do have any semicolons, for example, the sentence Williams describes the experiment as a definitive step forward. This comes outside of the quotation mark, and that would be a rule in general for all of them. So we don't really even need to go over the second example. The next part is placed a question mark or exclamation mark within closing quotation marks if the punctuation applies to the quotation itself. Place the punctuation outside the closing quotation mark if the punctuation applies to the whole sentence. So this one's a little bit more tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it's fairly easy. Philip asked, do you need this book? So as we see over here, do you need this book is the question, right? Philip asking is just the dialogue tag in front of it. But do you need this book is really the question. So the code is the question. Therefore, the question mark would go inside the quotation marks. Does Dr. Lim always say to her students, you must work harder? As we see, the sentence starts off with does. Obviously, the start of the sentence is a great indicator to determine if it's a question or not. but the start of the sentence starts off with does, and that's not a part of the code or anything. So therefore, we know the whole sentence is in fact a question. So therefore, the question mark would go outside the quotation marks. Okay, so that brings us to the end of that lesson. Does anyone have any questions about what we just went over in terms of punctuating quotations? Okay, the next part is a little bit of a longer lesson as well, but this one, I think, yeah, everyone will have opportunities to read through. It's more going to be each of you taking turns reading through the slides. And for certain parts, I'm obviously going to take over as well, but let's start off with this slide. Nathan, can you go ahead and read this slide?
The art of writing consists of four main types: descriptive, narrative, expository, and persuasive. Each has a unique style and its own purpose. Narration, also known as the ability to tell stories, has its sole purpose to describe and transmit both fictional and factual tales. Every time you tell a friend or relative something that has happened to you, you engage in a form of narration. The difference between factual and fictional narration lies in the amount of proofs the storyteller has to offer to its listener. For fictional stories, those that are made up or imagined, the writer is in charge of creating the characters and events he or she seems relevant to the story. Further, another difference between both narratives has to do with the writer's purpose. Factual storytellers, such as memoirs and biographies, try to describe and explain events that as they happened or as they remember them happening. Whereas fictional tale makers, like novels or short stories, can depart from real events or people because they do not tell to retell a factual situation. I hope you understand the concepts and its different stages better. Below is a detailed guide with narrative, essay ideas to help you succeed every time you write.
Okay, so what is a narrative essay? I'm sure we went over this a couple of different times, but just to briefly go over it, a narrative essay is a text used, but we haven't went over this exact lesson. This is a different one. But in general, I think we visited narrative essays at least once or twice from what I remember. So a narrative essay is a text used to construct and communicate a story with characters, conflict, and settings. Narrative writing is used in almost every piece of writing, whether fiction or nonfiction. It has a central point that the whole narrative revolves around, including incidents and the characters. A narrative essay is similar to a simple five-paragraph essay in that it has the same format. It is only different in that it is a narrative, having characters, incidents, and dialogues. Narrative writing including poetry, narrative writing includes poetry, anecdotes, and novels. So we're going to be taking a look at more open-ended prompts, but just for both of you, just for all of you to differentiate between them. Specific prompts are write about the time you met your best friend, or write about a story about your first trip to the beach. Very specific, only one possible story. Whereas open-ended prompts write about something you did that you're very happy for, or write about a story about what you like your future life to be. You have more options to choose with an open-ended prompt. Okay, Liam, can you go ahead and read this slide?
Difference between narrative essay and short story. Both writings have a few differences that come to play big on paper. In a narrative essay, you will use facts to tell a story, typically relying on your memory. With short stories, you will make up the content, creating characters and events that suit the story. The first one is known to make writers struggle with accuracy because they fully rely on their memory for details or exact dialogue. Further, when writing a narrative paragraph, you'll need a thesis statement, where the first paragraph of the text has to inform the reader of the main idea of the paper. As you tell a story throughout your essay, you will work towards proving or showing the accuracy of your thesis statement. Although a short story does not have a thesis statement, many short stories do have a central theme.
Okay, purpose of a narrative essay. Ultimately, whether the story is fact or fiction, narrative writing tries to relay a series of events in an emotionally engaging way. If you want to know how to start a narrative essay, there's one fundamental question you should ask yourself. What is my purpose? You want your audience to be moved by your story, which can mean through laughter, sympathy, fear, anger, and so on. The more clearly you tell your story, the more emotionally engaged your audience is likely to be, having in mind the correct style and approach to perfectly communicate your idea. So I do want everyone to kind of maybe gather some ideas for their narrative essay. We are going to be choosing from specific prompts, which I'll introduce near the end. But even if you have a couple of different ideas, I'm sure it's possible to use them with the prompts that we are taking a look at since they are open-ended prompts. So just gather some ideas. We're not going to complete the entire essay. Typically, it is a five-paragraph structure. There is definitely an introduction and a conclusion that's needed. The body paragraphs, it can be 2 to 3 paragraphs depending on how much writing you're able to get done. I don't expect the entire essay to be completed. We're going to be working on this for about 20 minutes using class time. So we'll try and get as much done as possible. But in that time, I would hope for at least the introduction and maybe two of the body paragraphs to be complete. And I just wanted to give this kind of as a heads up to what we're working towards after the end of this lesson. Okay, Kevin, can you go ahead and read this slide?
Bonus. What makes a good narrative essay? Narrative essay tells a vivid story, usually from one person's viewpoint. A narrative essay uses all the story elements such as beginning, middle, and ending, as well as plot, character, setting, and climax. Use different body paragraphs for each to visually allow the reader to have some rest while reading, and also separate the different periods in the story. The plot's usually told chronologically, and the story always has a purpose. Further, it may be used dialogue if the writer chooses to. It's written with sensory details and bright descriptions that involve the reader. All these details relate in some way to the main point the writer is making. For example, if you choose to write about a place you visit alone, it could be told without dialogue, but if you want to narrate about the time you met a celebrity, for example, conversations should be included.
Okay, and Nathan, can you go ahead and read this slide?
What makes a narrative essay relies on three fundamental characters. Characters are very important in this type of writing, even if the essay is an autobiography. The person writing the essay becomes a character that involves some other characters who behave, act, and do things like the rest of the participants presented in novels and stories. It revolves around a theme or a motive, which is presented in a thesis statement that breaks down in three different parts. Further, in the text, these parts are elaborated through characters and body paragraphs that follow the essay structure. Lastly, dialogue is used between characters to capture conversation. It is the third most important element in which the narrative essay writer decides how to tell a story he or she wants to portray.
And Liam, can you go ahead and read this slide?
Types of narrative essay. Writing a narrative essay can seem difficult if you don't have a clear view of what you want to communicate or how to do it. There are several types of narrative essays: fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. Fiction is an imaginary narrative based on the writer's thoughts, ideas, and feelings presented as a series of many events. It can be presented in a formal of a novel, folk tale, short story, and a play, among others. Nonfiction, on the other hand, counts as a personal narrative essay where it's based on real information, facts, or happenings. Biographies, along with journals and diaries, are the most common nonfiction writings. Poetry can be both fictional or nonfictional because it's a narrative where the expression of feelings and ideas is given intensity by the distinctive style and rhythm. Sonnets and epics are the most frequently used.
So there are four common narrative essay writing: linear, nonlinear, quest, and viewpoint. A linear narrative presents the story in the same order as the events that happened. It can be done through any narrative perspective, first person narration, second, third. An example of a linear narrative can be found in Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen's most famous book. On the other hand, a non-linear narrative presents the story's events out of order, usually employing flashbacks and other literary resources that shift the chronology of a story. Those are more complex examples, for example, the Odyssey or even Homer's epic poem. These all present the events in different orders. A quest narrative is a story in which the protagonist works tirelessly toward a goal, which becomes the all-consuming passion of the story and makes the character face a huge amount of obstacles along the way. Moby Dick and Sherlock Holmes are two top examples of a quest narrative. And a viewpoint narrative is designed to express the points of view or subjective personal experience of the main character or other fictional characters in the story. In this one, writing, moods, feelings, and other sensory details are filtered through the narrator's own life and subjective point of view. In Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov, the first-person narrative comes from Humbert, a man who has been in psychiatric clinic multiple times and casts the entire story in a subjective, untrustworthy light. So, for our essay, we're just going to be sticking to a linear narrative. It's the more simpler one, but I did want to have the rest introduced as well. Okay, and Nathan, can you go ahead and read this slide? Nathan, can you go ahead and read this slide? Okay, maybe you stepped away. Okay, Liam, can you go ahead and read this slide?
How long is a narrative essay? Well, it all depends. But generally, a good narrative essay is about 5 pages long and has a few standard requirements along the way. Some colleges require a narrative essay of 500 words only. So, if it's your case, just modify the number of blocks to fit the required word count. Narrative essays should be as short and informative as possible, creating an engaging story without lacking information and following the established format. A narrative essay structure consists of an introduction where the main idea is presented in about 3 to 5 sentences. The main body collects supportive arguments for the story. Every new idea has a paragraph of around 3 to 5 blocks, and finally a conclusion where you can sum up and prove what you stated in the introduction. Generally, in 3 to 5 well-arranged sentences, you can succeed at this.
Okay, how to start a narrative essay. To begin, of course, read through the prompts carefully. And if you do have any other assessments, make sure you go through that as well. But in general, brainstorm some ideas. We don't really have time for too much brainstorming. That's why I said maybe think of some possible stories that you'd want to go over. One of the best ways to start a narrative essay is through a provoking statement or by asking a question to the person reading the paper. A tip to have in mind is to rely on descriptive words and adjectives that allow the reader to visualize the story better. So focus on imagery as well. Try to be as detailed as possible without boring the person. The text should be informative and engaging at the same time, authentic and compelling. Okay, I just want to see how many more slides we have left to do. So, Kevin, can you go ahead and read this slide?
How to format and structure a narrative essay. The narrative essay format consists of an introduction, a thesis statement, the main body, and conclusion. The first two are an overview of what your text will talk about. The main body will introduce and develop your character, locations, and dialogue to further sum up the story in the conclusion. Your essay must have a clear introduction. Body paragraphs that are not only sequential, but also transitional, and anything that leads the reader to something to think about. The introduction must contain a hook sentence that catches the attention of the reader, a thesis statement explaining why your essay is going to be about, and a clear description of why the topic is relevant to you. The main body should include an overview of the background setting, all the people, key people included, some semblance of foreshadowing, as well as the onset of the event, and the climax, finally the resolution. Conclusion has to address the moral story of events significantly to add a call to all action as well. Action as well.
Okay, so the narrative essay outline. One of the most important things to consider is elaborating a relevant point, where the reader can understand the connection between the story and the topic you chose. This includes writing concisely and from a clear point of view, as well as a clear and crisp language where the use of descriptive words and phrases is frequent. Having a dictionary nearby to look for synonyms and new words is a great tool to guarantee an amazing essay. To create your outline, you just have to consider three essential parts: introduction, body, and conclusion. As we stated before, an introduction is the most crucial section of any essay. It should be compelling enough that it makes the reader excited to read the full paper. The first introductory paragraph is the one that you should pay more attention to. Make sure it catches the reader's attention. If you're struggling with this part, write down the paragraph or sentence and ask a friend or relative to take a look and ask them if they'd read the complete essay, or ask them if they'd read the complete essay. The main body should contain all the details of the story, including background characters, thoughts, and more, while also sharing facts and guiding readers through the plot. Use vivid descriptions of events to help the reader paint a better picture. Dialogue also helps with presenting the story more effectively, and they give life to the story as well as support to the story's atmosphere. As for characters, they are the people acting and behaving in the story. Provide detailed descriptions and explain what role they're playing in the story. The conclusion is the final part of the essay, and it provides the outcome of the story. It bears the same importance as the introduction paragraph, and it should contain the moral of the story or the lesson you learned from the story. If required, a call to action too. So this is really important, a narrative essay thesis statement. This is the most important element of the introductory paragraph because it provides the full picture for the rest of the paper. Usually it is written at the end of the introduction paragraph to give the essay more power. It is the main theme around which the whole story of the paper will revolve. To write a good thesis statement, make sure you have selected the topic beforehand. Once done with that, try to remember the event you'll write about as detailed as possible. Ask yourself how you would react to that situation or event and turn it into a question or sentence for your readers. Here are some good examples of a good thesis statement. I have only one life and I will use it and I will use every opportunity to be happy. Love has changed my whole life and made me a new person. Here's why. So as we see, these thesis statements are less formal than what we see with a typical essay, but at the end of the day, it does have the same purpose, which is to kind of outline the purpose of the entire essay. So we're going to be choosing one of the prompts below and write in our narrative essay. We are writing a minimum of 3 paragraphs, and what I mean by that is 3 paragraphs during class time, an introduction and body paragraphs. This should really just be 5 sentences minimum per paragraph. So each paragraph should be at least 5 sentences, and that includes the introduction, body paragraphs, and the conclusion can be a little bit less, but for what we're working on right now, I'd say it should be at least 5 sentences per each of the paragraphs. I don't think anyone's going to get to the conclusion. It's up to you how much body paragraphs you have. Again, there should be at least 2, but you can have up to 3 body paragraphs. Whatever isn't completed right now will, of course, be assigned for homework. And again, make sure to keep the lesson in mind. We went over a lot of information, including how to punctuate dialogue. So I do want to see dialogue being used in the story as well. In terms of the prompts, the first prompt is write about a time when you worked hard toward accomplishing a goal. Tell the story about the goal, why you set the goal, and the steps you took to accomplish the goal, and how you felt once it was accomplished. The second is to write about the accomplishment you are most proud of. In your narrative, explain your accomplishment, describe why you are most proud of it, and tell the story surrounding it. The third prompt is to write about a time when you experienced hardship or failure. In your narrative, elaborate on the hardship, explain the events and feelings surrounding the hardship or failure, and how you have grown from the experience. Number 4 is to write about your best childhood memory. In your narrative, tell the story of that memory. And the fifth option is to write about an event from your past that has shaped the person who you are today. In your narrative, tell the story surrounding that event and explain its significance on who you are today. So these are the 5 options you have in terms of choosing your prompt. And again, the instructions are really simple. To make this really clear and straightforward once more, I am expecting the introduction and at least 2 of the body paragraphs to be completed. And I do want to see dialogue being used in the body paragraphs. And please don't get the structure confused. There should be no dialogue, or unless really needed, in the introduction. The introduction is where you kind of set up the main purpose of the essay, but the body paragraphs is where you actually show the narrative, where you actually tell us the story. So remember, you are telling a story and you are also writing an essay. Don't forget that. It's easy to always forget one or the other and prioritize one over the other and make it a short story or a complete essay rather than a blend, which should be a really good narrative essay. And again, one more time, does anyone have any questions at all? Okay, right now I'd say the time is about 7:45. We're going to start the 20 minutes from 7:45, so we'll work on this until 8 until 8:05. If anyone does have any questions at any point, feel free to ask me. I'll also be checking in halfway through the activity. And even as you do finish each of your paragraphs, it would be great if you're able to send in your paragraphs upon completion. For example, if you're done with the introduction, you can finish it and send it into the chat and continue working with the rest of your paragraphs. That way, it'll be easy for me to gather feedback and prepare it during class. It would just make my life a little bit easier. So if that's possible, that'll be great. And if you're pasting it onto the slides, the same thing. If you're done with the paragraph, you can just paste it onto the slides. That way I'll know because I'll be watching the screen the whole time. And again, if anyone has any questions at any point, feel free to ask me. I'm just going to stay on this slide with all of the prompts. And again, the take-up time is 8:05. Around 7:55, I'll just be checking to see if anyone's done their introduction and maybe started their body paragraph so I can collect the introduction from them. Okay, just wanted to check in with everyone. Right now the time is 7:52. We still have about 13 minutes left in the activity. Kevin, it's great that you're working on the slides. I do see that you're done with your introduction. Okay. And Liam, thank you for sending in your introduction as well. Nathan, as I did mention, I'm not sure if you did step up for a little bit. So I did mention that I'm looking to get the introduction and the body paragraphs as they're done. It'll be easier for me to take a look at them and give them feedback as we go through. So if you can try
My
and,
internet just broke.
pardon me?
My internet just broke
Oh, okay.
before.
But is there any questions you have at all about the activity we're working on?
No.
Okay, great. So yeah, once you're just done with the introduction, if you could send it into the chat or paste onto the slide, it'll be great. The goal is to finish the introduction and at least two of the body paragraphs, but even if you're able to do just one of the body paragraphs, that would be fine as well. Just wanted to give a reminder, we only have about 6 minutes left, so about 5 minutes remaining for the activity. At 8:05, we'll proceed with the take-up. And so far, I've received two introductions. And Kevin, I see you're working on your second body paragraph as well. That's great. And Nathan, I haven't received anything from you yet. It would be great if you can send an introduction. And everyone at least try and finish an introduction and one body paragraph before we proceed with the take-up. And Liam, if you are done with your second with your first body paragraph, it would be great for you to send that in as well. Okay, the time is 8:05. If there's any other work to be submitted, please do submit so right now. And otherwise, I'm just going to proceed with the take up. So Liam, let me just go ahead and paste in your response as well. Okay, Liam, can you go ahead and read your response?
Wait, I have another paragraph. Can I send it to you right now?
Yeah, sure. Okay, Kevin, in the meantime, it's fine. I see that you did finish the intro and the two body paragraphs. That's what I was looking for. So can you go ahead and read your response?
Have you ever set a goal for yourself? Well, I have. This previous year, I want to be able to get the triple honors, where I'd skip ahead free grade levels when doing math. I set this goal because I wanted to be really good at something. And I learned that you should set goals for yourself because good things will happen. In my first year at any Mason school, it was my first year at any Mason school. I learned from my parents that I would take a test called the MAP test 3 times, once in the fall, winter, and spring. Once in fall, winter, and spring. I also learned that was a very big deal because this would decide what level of honors you would be in next year. I didn't really prepare before the first test during the fall, so I got 251. Even though my friends were saying things like, "How did you get a score that high?" and "Wow, you're good at math" after the test, I was not satisfied with the score. After the fall test, I worked hard learning new topics before finally it was time for the winter test. I did not improve greatly on this one, only getting a 261. This did not make me too happy because I had hoped for something higher. Again, even though my friends were still saying things like, "That's an insane score," and "Wow, how do you get a score that high?" I was still not satisfied and need at least a 270 to make it the triple honors. So it all came down to what I got on the spring test. The spring test is amazing. I scored 275, and I had high hopes that I'd make triple honors. And
Okay, great job and definitely fantastic job in terms of the structure and the overall flow to the narrative essay. I just want to go over some corrections first. Before I go over the points of improvement, I just wanted to make a change to this sentence. I did not improve greatly on this one. So rather, we would need a comma over here. So this one, we'll put a comma. And rather than writing only getting a 261, you should write and only got a 261. Okay, and I do have some points of improvement that I want to go over. Just some quick notes that I did gather while reading through your essay. Starting off with strong theme, but try to show more emotions during key moments, especially because a lot of it does feel a little bit more technical, but you showing your own emotions, maybe getting into your own headspace, would be more beneficial to the narrative aspect of the story. Avoid repetition of friend quotes. Vary the reactions, or maybe you could shorten them, but maybe just a little bit of variety would make that a little bit more interesting. Expand on how you prepared or felt leading up to the spring test. A little bit more of a build up would be more gradual towards how the payoff feels at the end. And clarify the meaning of triple honors briefly for readers unfamiliar with it. So think of anything you introduce in any type of writing as something that the reader does not know about. So it is important for you as the author to make sure the reader is familiar with that topic. So clarifying the meaning, perhaps in the introduction, would be great for the overall essay. And in general, add a more descriptive hook to draw readers in. So this can be within the introduction in general, but also using descriptive words all throughout would be great as well. I'm just going to label this slide feedback so we remember. Okay, and Kevin, do you have any questions about the provided feedback?
no.
Okay. And Liam, great, you pasted it in as well. Fantastic. Okay, Liam, can you go ahead and start reading through your response?
Have you ever thought about missing one of your best childhood memories? Well, today I'll be sharing one of my best childhood memories that I still remember till this day. It all starts one day when it would be my first time going to Hawaii. Me and my family will go to Hawaii this summer, and I have been waiting for this all year. For the past few weeks, I could not sleep but think of this trip. So when the day came, I boarded the plane and started our journey to Hawaii. I would soon fall asleep, and when I woke up, I would find myself already on the island Honolulu. I would unload and follow my mom to find our tour guide that would escort us to our hotel. We booked a nice hotel right next to the sea, and every day I would go swimming at the beach. The first day, we took a long rest and didn't go anywhere except eat, sleep, and swim. However, for tomorrow, a long, hard day awaited me. I would wake up to hear my mom yelling, "Wake up, Liam," very loud as I would open my eyes to look at the time, find out that we were gonna be late. The next day, we went snorkeling on a snorkeling trip to Shark Cove, and I saw many fishes and sea animals. We had a great day, and I also got to go to a festival with shows in which I also tried to make a fire with a stick and wood. At about 10, we came back to our hotel, and I fell asleep almost immediately. But not long after 6 in the morning, my mom yelled at me and told me we had to leave right now. So I quickly changed and we got into our bus and started to head towards the pineapple plantation. We had a great time there and I got to eat a lot of fruits and ice cream. After that, we went on a helicopter and got to go on top of an active volcano and we saw the lava slowly going down the mountain. After that, we ate dinner and fell asleep.
Okay, great job overall with your narrative essay, and yeah, it definitely does sound like an exciting vacation. I just want to start off with some brief corrections first. Some of them, like I think one of them is just primarily related to the tense situation when you write the sentence, me and my family will go. Instead, it should be my family and I were going. So I just wanted to make that correction right over here. So let's cross this out and instead write my family and I were going to Hawaii this summer. Okay, and before I paste in the points of improvement, I also wanted to go over one more correction. Just give me 1 second. There was just okay, eminently. It would be incorrect in this context. I think maybe a better word would be immediately. So instead, we could write immediately. Oh, definitely spelled that wrong. Okay, great. Corrected itself. And yeah, here I also noticed on to should just be one word together. But yeah, I think that was about it. Everything else is fine in terms of small corrections. And did want to go over points of improvement as well. And Nathan, it is 8 minutes past the take-up time. It's important that we move on to the next activity. So if you do have something, please submit it. Otherwise, we'll be going ahead and moving on to the next activity. So starting off with the points of improvement, Liam, add more emotion or reflection to show why this memory is meaningful. You do highlight certain aspects of the trip, and some of them sound fantastic. For example, even the helicopter going over the volcanoes that are active. Something like that, maybe if you can just describe how it really felt for you and how this might be a memory that you'd hold on to for a while, or even if it's, I mean, again, like I don't personally know how it felt for you, so it's hard for me to tell you exactly what to write, but rather I would say focus on specific moments from the trip that mean something significant to you and kind of reflect on why that moment exactly was impactful. You can also vary the sentence structure. Too many of them start with be, with we or I. So maybe just think about how you can start your sentences a little bit differently. And try using more sensory language, especially smells, sound, and etc. Since you're describing a new place that you haven't been to yet. I'm sure you do have vivid memories, even if it's just the smell of the ocean breeze. I'm just trying to give you ideas, or even the sounds you heard while staying at the resort or hotel you were at. Or again, even being in a helicopter, for example, from what I remember, it's loud and you hear like, you hear the blades going at a really fast speed, even as you're approaching the helicopter. You kind of get thrown back by how intense it is. So even different sensory details you can relate back to that would definitely make for a better experience overall. And also in general, include a clearer conclusion or I mean, you didn't really get to that point, so let me just remove that part, but just wanted to go over these 3 points of improvement. And Liam, do you have any questions about the provided feedback?
No, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so Nathan, I did not receive your response for this. I know you mentioned you had some internet issues, but you were back for the class for majority of the time. So it is important that you do complete your response. So I'm just going to indicate that no response was provided over here. And please do make sure you're participating for the next activity. It is 8:15. I'm not sure how much time we're going to have to go over this. I might not be able to give feedback during class, but the whole purpose of this is to show rather than tell, and even this activity kind of gives us this opportunity to do so. In the next 5 minutes, I'm going to briefly go over the activity, and in the last 10 minutes, we'll work on writing the short story. Just to quickly introduce the prompt, I would suggest all of you can start working on the prompt during this time. You come home to find your front door slightly open, the scent of your favorite meal drifting out, even though no one else has a key. Inside, everything is just as you left it, except for one item on your desk that wasn't there before. Write a short story revealing what's happened without directly stating it. Show through actions, details, and atmosphere instead of explaining. Make sure to show and don't tell. So think about how you can show and not tell. It'll be much easier once we go through the lesson. But think of different ideas you can write in relation to the story. This is what you will have to complete by 8:30. 8:20 to 8:30 will primarily be dedicated to this. In the next 4 minutes, I'll just go over the rest of the notes on show and not telling. We went over this multiple times. Show, don't tell. It is something that is a little bit more difficult to pick up. That's why we always revisit it because it's necessary for all pieces of narrative writing. If you struggle with the difference between showing and telling, you're not alone. Once you've got it, it seems simple. But until you do, learning this technique can be frustrating as anything in the writing world. The best way I like to think of it is compared to a book, or think of it as a movie, because a good book is similar to a movie. It allows you to paint a picture without you realizing yourself. You're visualizing something in your head. That's what a good book does. But a movie kind of visually just outlines that for us. Think about describing everything you see on a movie. No character is blatantly going like, I am sad, right? We kind of see the sadness shown through the actions of the character. So think of that when thinking of showing rather than telling. The difference between showing and telling. When you tell rather than show, you inform your reader of information rather than allowing them to deduce anything. You're supplying information by simply stating it. You might report that a character is tall or angry or cold or tired. That is telling. Showing paints a picture the reader can see in their minds. If your character is tall, your reader can deduce that because you mention others looking up when they talk to him. Or he has to duck to get through a door, or when posing for a photo, he has to bend his knees to keep his head in a proximity with others. Think about how all of these kind of give cues to actually visually imagine something in a person's head. Rather than telling that your character is angry, show it by describing his face flushing, his throat tightening, his voice rising, his slamming a fist on a table. When you show, you don't have to tell. So if you're cold, don't tell me, show me. Your character pulls up her collar, tightens her scarf, shoves her hands deep into her pockets, turns her face away from the biting wind. If you're tired, your character can yawn, groan, stretch. His eyes can look puffy, his shoulders could slump. Another character might say, Didn't you sleep last night? You look shot. Some examples between telling and showing. Telling, when they embraced, she could tell he had been smoking and was scared. Versus showing. When she wrapped her arms around him, the sweet staleness of tobacco enveloped her, and he shivered. The temperature fell, and the ice reflected on the sun. A showing version of that would be Bill's nose, burned in the frigid air, and he squinted against the sun, reflecting off the street. Another great way to show is to use dialogue. Riveting dialogue breaks up the narrative summary, differentiates characters, especially through dialect and word choice. Think about how different characters talk with different characters. Maybe two friends would talk to each other differently from how one character might talk to their parent. This also allows a story to emerge naturally rather than yours spelling out every detail. Instead of telling with clunky detail like this, just because you're in this hospital because you were nearly killed in that wreck when Bill was driving, that doesn't mean you shouldn't forgive him. That is exposition. Too much information being presented at once and not an interesting way to actually take it in as well. Whereas you can also rate, what are you going to do about Bill? He feels terrible. He ought to. Well, has he visited? Again, a lot more to think about the characters, how they feel about each other. Even these short responses kind of give an indication to how this character might not be too pleasant with this conversation, and he might not even have too much care to even respond fully. Some examples about how you can relate the five senses. For example, with sight, Starling soared in dark flocks. Covered in soot, he carried his son from the blaze. Sound, Thunder rattled the windows. Laughter broke the silence. Smell, pumpkin and cinnamon wafted from the kitchen. She awoke to the aroma of percolating coffee. Even think about it. You start off the story by walking into your favorite meal already being cooked. So think about how you would describe that with smell. Taste. Her lips puckered as the lemon touched her tongue. He savored the fluid yolk of the eggs Benedict. Touch. The smooth stone felt cool in her palm. Smooth silk swallowed Rita in the bed. Active voice adds power. To eliminate passive voice, eliminate as many of your state of being verbs as possible. So is, am, are, was, were, they should be avoided. Instead of writing the party was planned by Joe, you can write Joe planned the party. It is more of an active sentence. The wedding cake was made by Ben. Ben made the wedding cake. This is something we'll come back to later on as well. We'll look at all of this in more detail later on, but just wanted to quickly get through the examples. These are both really great examples. I'm just going to go read through The Sign of Four by Arthur Conan Doyle, who also wrote the Sherlock Holmes books. So in this novel, Dr. John Watson's observation of Sherlock Holmes could have been boring, but notice how Doyle handles it. So swift, silent, and furtive were his moments, like those of a trained bloodhound picking out a scent, that I could not but think what a terrible criminal he would have made had he turned his energy and sagacity against the law instead of exerting them in his defense. This is simply just by describing how Sherlock Holmes is looking at a crime scene. But we're able to kind of gather this detail and what also Dr. John Watson thinks of him. He thinks he's so powerful that if he was a criminal, it would have been something that would have been prominent against the law. Okay, let's take a look at the creative writing prompt once more. You come home to find your front door slightly open, the scent of your favorite meal drifting out, even though no one else has a key. Inside, everything is just as you left it, except for one item on your desk that wasn't there before. You are going to be writing a short story revealing what's happened without directly stating it. Show through actions, details, and atmosphere instead of explaining. It's not going to be too long. I'm hoping some of you have already started writing as I went through the lesson. Otherwise, you only have about 8 minutes left to write your short story. Before we get started, does anyone have any questions? Okay, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask me at any point. We won't be able to take this up during class, but at 8:30, I'm going to end off all submissions. Based off what I receive either in the chat or on the slides, I will give feedback immediately after class. So 5 minutes after class, you can check back onto the slides. Everything will be on the slides, including your work as well as the feedback. I'll also be going over the homework and the writing assignment maybe around 8:28 while everyone is still working on their short story. And again, if anyone has any questions at any point, feel free to ask me. Okay, so I did receive Liam. Thanks for sending your response. I'm sure you might be working on it as well, but I'm just gonna go ahead and paste this in. I'm gonna let everyone still continue working on their short story. Kevin, I see you're still writing as well. And Nathan, please do make sure you do send in a response for this activity. I'm just gonna go over the writing assignment in the meantime. So the writing assignment is a moment that changed you. So this is great because from the two responses I received for the narrative essay, this is a different topic. But here, you're told to write a narrative essay about a real or fictional experience that taught you an important life lesson. It's much better if it's real. The only reason the fictional is given as an option is for those that say, I can't think of an idea. But to complete the assignment, you should think of something, even if you're making it up. Your goal is to tell a story that reveals how a specific moment, decision, or event changed your perspective, beliefs, or personal growth. Use descriptive language, personal reflection, and storytelling techniques to draw the reader in and make them feel the significance of the experience. Write in the first person point of view, so use I, to share the experience from your perspective. Choose a clear, meaningful event or moment that had a lasting impact on you. Structure your essay with a clear beginning, so an introduction, middle, where you actually have the narrative, and an end. Include sensory details and vivid descriptions to help the reader imagine the scene. Use at least one conflict or obstacle, whether it be internal or external. Internal is a conflict the character faces with themselves, or external is, of course, maybe another character or an object or some type of obstacle that's ahead of them. End with a reflection that shows what you've learned and how you grew as a result of the experience. A bonus challenge for this assignment is to use a symbol, which can either be an object, place, or action that represents your transformation or learning in the story. For example, a broken watch might represent lost time or regret, or a tree could symbolize growth. Again, this is just a bonus challenge, something that I like giving at the end of each writing assignment. Okay, and Kevin, I do see you're still working on it. And Liam, if you do have anything left to send in, please do send it in right now. Otherwise, everyone, please check back in the next 5 minutes and you can see the feedback applied to your writing. I'm going to go ahead and dismiss the class. If anyone has any questions about the homework or writing assignment, please feel free to ask me right now. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and dismiss the class. I hope everyone has a great week ahead of themselves. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.